Hi, my name is Laila Bernstein. I am advisor to the mayor for the initiative to end chronic homelessness here in the city of Boston. And I'm here with my colleagues recording a presentation called Integrated Data and Coordinated Access, Boston's Open Source Solution. This is a presentation we gave at the National Human Services Data Consortium back in April. I'm here with my colleague Jennifer Flynn, who is the HMIS administrator for the city of Boston, and Ian Kozak, who is Director of Strategic Development for Green River. And we're talking about our integrated data and coordinated access, our open source solution for ending homelessness. And so I'm going to give a little bit of background, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jen to talk about our data system, and then we'll pass it off to Ian to talk about the technology and the open source build that we've built together. So, next slide. So, a little bit of history. So in Boston, the city of Boston is the lead agency for the continuum of care HUD dollars. We get about $24 million annually for housing homeless and ending homelessness. We're also the lead agency for HMIS, Homeless Management Information System. And the city runs about 40% of the single adult shelter beds in a city-run shelter. So we're the lead in multiple ways, and back in October of 2014, there's a crisis in our homeless system, and the city-run shelter that was located on an island in our harbor, the bridge going to that island was condemned. It was unsafe. And so in a moment's notice, we had to relocate those shelter beds somewhere else in the city. And it posed a real crisis for the system, but even more so for the people experiencing homelessness who had been staying in those beds. And it was an opportunity for the city to think about how we were responding to homelessness, not just how are we going to respond to this crisis, how are we going to relocate the beds, but how are we ending homelessness in the city of Boston, and what could we be doing differently and more effectively. So we took time to convene partners, bring in experts, and think about what we have and what we're doing and where we need to head. So we created this based on a visual, actually, that Corporation for Supportive Housing invented. And it's really just the tip of the iceberg, but it shows the chaos that people go through and the kind of illogic of our system when people are trying to find their way out. And really the solution, the bottom resources are all housing resources or permanent supportive housing resources, and that is how someone ends their own homelessness, or how a system ends homelessness, is by providing housing. But to get to those resources, it was, best case scenario, first come, first serve. Worst case scenario, people who could navigate complexity and difficult bureaucracies got the housing first. And so, but looking at that, we realized we really need to flip this on its head. So instead, what we kind of came out of that planning process with is that we came out with an action plan to end chronic and veteran homelessness, and it's really about creating this single homeless response system out of our many different programs, some of which are best in the nation, but really need to be working arm in arm with every other resource that we have. So that's been our goal for the last few years. So the action plan put forward these very ambitious goals. They're very familiar to communities across the country: end veteran homelessness, end chronic homelessness, and we knew to accomplish either of those goals, we would have to transform our entire system and transform how we were responding to homelessness. We did have an early win at the end of 2015. The mayor was able to announce that we had ended chronic homelessness among veterans, and that gave us a lot of momentum and learning that we've used to propel the rest of the initiative. So where are we right now? So we've actually updated this since we gave the presentation in April. We've housed 331 chronically homeless individuals since January of 2016. And when we tally up the number of years homeless that those 331 individuals had experienced, we know that we've ended over 2,000 years of homelessness. So we're housing really long-term homeless folks with our system change, and we're remapping that maze and making sure that long-term homeless individuals are getting housed. So we put forward in the plan 4 system transformation elements. We are going to be focused on kind of the 2, or actually coordinated access and the data behind this. Really, to do any kind of system transformation, we've had to also transform our data system, make sure our data system is also driving the change and is as unified and efficient as it can be. So I put red, so first let me say, the 4 boxes are front door triage, which is really about triaging folks as they first become homeless, making sure we're connecting them with the resource they need, just like an emergency room. Rapid rehousing is about giving short-term resources to folks who need a little bit to get back into housing, like first month, last month rent, and triaging the right folks for that intervention. Coordinated access is our housing matching engine that we'll talk more about in a minute. And of course, permanent supportive housing is the solution to long-term homelessness, certainly chronic homelessness. It's affordable housing with long-term supports. And we know that we need more in the city of Boston to reach our goals. So I put a red box around front door triage and coordinated access because those 2 pieces combined are what HUD refers to as coordinated entry. We have them in kind of 2 different pieces. So people may be more familiar with the term coordinated entry. So the coordinated access system, like I said, is our housing matching engine that we've built. And so the way that this works is on one side, we're sucking in the rich HMIS data that we've been collecting for years upon years, and we're finally putting it to use to get people into housing. So on the one side, we're sucking in the HMIS data. On the other side, we have our housing providers telling us when there are vacancies. And when they alert us to a vacancy, we know specifically what the rules are, the eligibility criteria for getting into that unit, if it's for an elderly person, if it's for someone who's chronically homeless, and we're making sure that we're using the data to match the most vulnerable person to that vacancy, and make sure that they get the first opportunity at being housed. And so the system makes the match. It creates a ranked list based on vulnerability, and we're using first date homeless as the way that we're ranking that list. And then it generates emails along the way. We didn't want our HMIS users to have to log into another system. And so we're still, the message is HMIS, 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 enter your HMIS data, but the matching engine will tell you by email what step in the process that match is at. And you interact, or the users interact with the system through that email link. So what are we accomplishing by having this kind of housing matching engine? First, we're targeting resources to the most vulnerable first. So by creating this list, no longer is it, yeah, you serve chronically homeless individuals, go ahead and find one. We're saying, house this most vulnerable person first, and house them, as quickly as you can. And so, that piece really is working. This coordinated access system really has flipped the system on its head in that way. And it also is bringing transparency to our work. So it's bringing transparency in that we know when a match is made. We know, first of all, our rules are very transparent. So our contractors know what the expectations are for making that match. but also the person experiencing homelessness knows, has transparency around, okay, I've been offered this resource, these are my these are my options, this is how the process will work. So there's more transparency for the clients. And then last, as a system, there's more transparency. We now, as a COC, see the practices and the speed and the steps that our housing providers take to house someone, and we've, in the process, negotiated that those barriers be lowered, and that we really get to the most, the most housing first model that we can across the board. So the transparency has brought that level of accountability for our system. And it's also more efficient to have a system that is automatically looping in all the staff that need to be involved in a housing match. We're certainly using our resources to house the most vulnerable. There's an efficiency there. And we're continuously working on improving this match so that the process is faster and streamlined and more efficient. So we've gotten rid of some of our paper applications. We've gotten rid of some of the steps that people need to go through, and we're really streamlining the process of getting folks into housing. So I'm going to turn over to Jen Flynn, HMIS Administrator for the City of Boston.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Flynn, the HMIS Administrator for the City of Boston, and I'm going to give you a little bit of info about what our system actually looks like in the matter of numbers. So annually we see about 11,000 single adults in our emergency shelter system, 2,600 families, 1,700 single adults on any given night. We have 27 service agencies that use our HMIS system, 4 HMIS installations, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute, and then about 700 users. That 4 HMIS installations is really the backbone of why we needed an HMIS data warehouse. We in Boston have a long history of collecting HMIS data before it was even called HMIS and before it was a HUD requirement. So because of that, there are a lot of legacy systems in place, and we made the decision in Boston that we did not want users to enter data into multiple systems. Therefore, we took advantage of HUD CSV specifications and built a data warehouse for data transfer. Another wrinkle, and not just on the legacy systems, but Massachusetts is a right to shelter state, and our state housing and community development partners run our emergency shelter system for families statewide. So all family providers are required to use the state's HMIS system. Again, therefore, we needed a data warehouse in order to do COC-wide HUD required reporting. We do provide a front-end software license for providers. They can use whichever system they want, but to be an HMIS participating provider, they must upload their CSV data into our HMIS at least monthly. So the warehouse consolidates all of our HMIS reporting. It gives us a 360-degree view of our clients and our performance across the COC, and also is the backbone now of our housing coordinated access process. And as Laila said, during, a few years ago, we had a number of things happen that led us to making the decision that we really needed to make an investment to update our technical backbone of the COC. Boston, as a major city, was involved in a number of HUD and other federal partner initiatives, the 100,000 Homes campaign, 100 Vets in 100 Days in 25 cities. Some we happily joined, others not so much. Also around that time, as Laila mentioned, we had a kind of catastrophic event and had to evacuate roughly 700 shelter, transitional housing, and substance abuse treatment beds off of the Long Island shelter. All of that led to a crisis in our data, and our data warehouse had not been updated in 10 years. It was about 2005 when it was built, and as we all know, technology has greatly advanced in these years. So through the Mayor's Action Plan, a significant financial investment was made in order to do this. It was the first time we at the City of Boston and as a COC lead and HMIS lead had had such a significant financial investment in our technical backbone. What that meant was we wanted to preserve our HMIS infrastructure, minimize the duplication of data entry for our clients, and then going forward, be able to leverage some new analytics and move our system forward. Again, technology is advancing so quickly nowadays that something that we create today is obsolete tomorrow. So with our large financial investment, as a public agency, we had to put out a publicly advertised RFP with very explicit instructions for what we needed in the warehouse. We spent a lot of time writing our RFP. It reads more like a story than an RFP because, again, we needed to be able to tell a vendor how our system worked and be able to design a system that worked for us and not an off-the-shelf product that the vendor thought should be working this way. We worked with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics and the Department of Innovation and Technology on ownership rights, which was a very exciting idea for us. As we put out the RFP, we had a number of options as how you could respond. An off-the-shelf vendor, an off-the-shelf product that we could customize, or work for hire, which is the solution that we ended up going with. The really cool part of that is that Boston owns the code for the system. And we have put it out on the open source. Something also that was very different for us was an agile development. We'd never gone through that process before. We've always had fairly off-the-shelf products and then customized as needed. With this agile development process, we started from scratch, put something together very quickly, put it out there in the works, tested it, and then started making refinements as we saw how the system was working. I'm going to share a few screenshots now of our warehouse that have become so useful to us. To be able to see a 360-degree view of a client amongst all shelters and providers that they're using has been an incredible wealth of information, both for our service providers, but also has helped the clients take out some steps, right? And really make sure that we're serving them at the most appropriate service level that they have. So here's a screenshot of my administrative view as the warehouse administrator. We've been able to bring in client records and do some automated joining systems from our 4 sources. I should probably mention that previously our warehouse was a monthly manually updated system. When we kind of flipped the switch on this new warehouse, we are now getting nightly data feeds from 3 different HMIS source providers, both off-the-shelf vendors that are out there in your world, as well as some homegrown systems from some other agencies. They're being fed through nightly to a secure SFTP server, and at this point in time, we are ingesting roughly 1 million records a night. The system is then taking in all these records, doing some smart matches for deduplication. We're looking at names, date of birth, social security number, and creating a single client view. Some things that are very useful for us is that not only can we just see program enrollments, but we can drill down on actual assessment data and have a client history calendar, which basically shows every point of service, every day that a client has come in. We've been able to start using this for housing history verifications as well as chronic homeless verifications with our housing providers. A few other reports that are available in the warehouse right now, a nightly census, both at the project type level, and we can drill down into the actual program level as well. And then not only that, if we can drill down even further and view each client that is counted in that census and which program they're at. So as I said earlier, our warehouse is our designated HMIS for the COC. That means a couple of different things, and that means that the warehouse is our reporting structure for HUD, and also our HMIS warehouse has to act as a HUD vendor, because anytime HUD makes data dictionary changes or programming changes in the reporting, we also have to make sure that those changes get done in the warehouse and not just on our front-end software providers. And again, as I mentioned, a provider is considered HMIS participating when their data is in our warehouse, at least on a monthly basis. So as the designated HMIS, we have the requirements to produce many HUD-required reports. So system performance measures are in here, housing inventory chart, point-in-time count, annual homeless assessment report. They're all generated now for Boston through the HMIS data warehouse. Other reports that we can view here, some data quality reports, a client's entry date is the same as their birthday. We have a potentially chronic homeless report, which has been invaluable in determining our most vulnerable clients, and also first-time homeless. And I just want to touch on that for a moment because this is something that we had never known before. We're working hard, housing our folks, housing our chronic, and our numbers just weren't going down. And we were able to determine from our first-time homeless report, at this point in time, Boston is receiving one brand new veteran to our system every day that has never taken a bed, and they're coming here now, as well as roughly just about 12 brand new people to our system as a whole a day. That is a number that none of us were expecting and not quite sure how to kind of handle that and deal with that, right? That's what front door triage is about. But because Boston is the large city in not only Massachusetts, but the whole New England region, we have clients coming from all over, both for support services, for hospital stays, any kind of health care that they need. We also, at this point, have somebody in our shelter system from every state in the nation. Our providers really needed to know who they were serving and where their clients were being served at. We, at Boston, even though we're a large city, we're really a small city. We're a very walkable city, and that means that folks can bounce from agency to agency. So after, I would say, maybe 18 months of dealing with lawyers, HIPAA lawyers, providers, city lawyers, we finally managed to get to the point where we can share data in our system. Both with client release and without client releases. And that's a very important distinction to make. So we formed a Boston Homeless Assistance Network. And basically it's kind of like a business service agreement, business associate agreement, and it allows our providers to share primary personal information about our clients in order to coordinate and provide services to them. That's the key here. We're coordinating our services. So regardless of if a client has signed a release of information, their basic demographic information and any previous program enrollments are available in our window into the warehouse. This window has been recently rolled out both to our street outreach teams, our front door triage, and our rapid rehousing programs. As we move forward and clients begin to sign releases, that will open up some more information, and providers will be able to view front door triage assessments, HUD intake assessments, and any other kind of contact information that needs to happen. In our window, we can see their first date that they were homeless and their last place of contact. That has been extremely important as we move through this coordinated access system in our housing placement system. A housing opportunity arrives for Joe Smith over at Shelter A, and Shelter A has not seen them in a while. They're able to go into our window into the warehouse and find out that the client may have had lunch at a participating shelter yesterday. So we can put that flag in that shelter's front-end HMIS system and alert and say, Joe Smith has a housing opportunity. Next time he shows up at your agency, we need to grab him so we can coordinate these services. At this point, I'm actually going to turn it over to our partner, Ian Kozak from Green River, so he can start the process of the tech side and how the actual back-end data system works.
So thank you, Jen. I'm Ian from Green River. We've been the software development partner with Boston on this project. And when we started, we had done no work for any municipality or in the homeless data. We had done public health sort of at the state and regional level, but this was completely new to us. So we've learned a lot. And when we first read the RFP and we first had meetings about this project, it seemed fairly straightforward. HMIS was well defined. I mean, there's all of these federal guidelines about what the data needs to look like, how it's collected. So we said, sure, we can put together a data warehouse. The federal government actually publishes even a data warehouse specification for a schema, and that's where we started. So we built out this warehouse, a database that began to consume the legal specification HMIS data from all of the different systems that Boston used. And as Jen said, there were quite a few of them. And that had its own bumps that we sort of didn't anticipate, actually. That seemed to be a simple process, but that ended up being a bit of a bureaucratic challenge. But we got over the bureaucratic challenge, we got the data, we began consuming it. And what we quickly realized was the warehouse then could be really the vehicle for integration beyond just that core HMIS specification. What's in HMIS, sure, it's the agency, the service providing history, it's some income history, but it's not the full assessment. It's not all of the forms or things of data that was collected, documents that were collected. And there aren't little things like client photos and release forms that actually are needed if you're using it as an operational system. So we started building out different ways of consuming data. And the system itself is set up to basically accept any kind of data in any kind of form. It's this modular data construction. So there's core HMIS data that comes in the exports that Jen was talking about. We also call back through the APIs available for the HMIS systems to pull down assessment documents and photos. And have a system where we can just start to consume pretty much any data shape. What that meant was the underlying database itself quickly evolved. It went from that HUD specification that was very clean and very simple and sort of could follow the programming recommendations to something that was kind of sprawling, that accepted all the different data types. So as a small technical thing, we ended up building views within the database that Jen and the other folks of Boston could actually pull out simplified data in a format they could use. As Jen mentioned, every night the system compares over 1 million records. That's not a million client records, but it's records of service, of enrollment, of people. And a huge challenge, very clearly, we stumbled upon was deduplication. Both within a single HMIS, I mean, there were plenty of instances where a given client was in there multiple times, and obviously across multiple HMISs. The whole point was to merge records from different systems. And again, that was one of those things that seemed easier said than done. So what we built were 3 tiers of deduplication. The first was completely automatic. There's 3 data fields. There's your birthday, there's your name and your social security number. If 2 of those 3 things match, boom, the system automatically merges you. The next tier is where the system can suggest, based on sort of the magic of data analytics, a similarity between clients. So it goes through and it calculates any new record it sees, and it says, wait a minute, this record, based on all the different attributes available in the system, appear to be like these other records. And the system isn't sure, because the name might not be the same, the social security number might not be the same, but it's close enough that it recommends that a human then goes and matches it. And it's actually smart enough to then learn from those patterns of matching, so long term, it should get more and more accurate. To be a little data geeky, I mean, it's basically looking at similarity coefficient. So it's doing Jar-Winkler and similarity cosine algorithms to match overall record similarity, and then it's using a Bayes to sort of learn from the history. We quickly realized, again, that the warehouse provided this vehicle for adding all kinds of different information. And as a side note, there's this project that was started by Boston Healthcare for the Homeless to bring in medical records that they have, all of their providers, in with HMIS data. So the idea is all of the service agencies providing services and housing to homeless can now join together in making an integrated care plan for individuals. The neat part about that is it's targeting people who are both chronically homeless and have chronic medical needs. And for the first time, pretty much in this area, I believe, all of that information is pulled together. So in a grand scheme, it means that each individual can have a very targeted care plan that multiple agencies are cooperating with. There's also small benefits, which means if someone walks into a day shelter, their case manager there can say, hey, Joe, do you know actually you have a doctor's appointment this afternoon? Because appointments and medications and case notes are actually now part of the system. This is actually just a wireframe of what the integrated care plan from Healthcare for the Homeless was going to look like. This is from Healthcare for the Homeless, and I say was because it's now been implemented. It's very similar to this, but the system is up and running and deployed and actually now is starting to serve clients. So that was a little side jaunt into some of the benefits of the warehouse. But the purpose of it, as Laila said starting off, was really to do coordinated access. And coordination often means communication. And we spent a long time figuring out how to loop in the different players and actors that needed to be involved in the process. Didn't need another system, that was very clear. So how can all of these people in all of the different agencies and all of the different capacities be involved in a way that was meaningful? And we came up with a bunch of different solutions. And this is pretty illegible, but I think what it does demonstrate is the number of pathways and actors. So each one of these channels in the swim lane document represents a type of user. So there's a variety of actors involved in the process, and each one of these swim lanes represents a different user group involved in the process. So they can be involved in different ways. They can be simply notified that some housing opportunity has become available and offered to a client. Maybe that's just an FYI that they need to know. They can be involved in a way that they can accept or make a comment on or actually reject the match and say, we know about that and it's not going to work out. Or they can actually log in and sort of be involved in the multiple client process and get a fuller view of what's going on. For the notifications that go out, we've worked it in several ways. One is just the passive email that Laila described that sort of gives a notification. It's redacted so that it's private. The other way is to send out an email, a time-expiring link that if someone clicked on it gets additional information, but again, that is sort of limited in privacy and permission. And then the final solution was someone can actually log into the system and see the full details of the client and the match opportunity. The one thing I'd like to point out to this is the client is actually part of this process and is a user of the system, receives notifications and can interact with the process to some degree of where they are. The internal workings of coordinated access rely a lot on trying to figure out the best match between a given individual and a housing opportunity that comes available. And that's, again, kind of easier said than done. So what it allows is eligibility rules of sort of what are the requirements and restrictions on a given opportunity to be set at, and I will read this, at the program level, the sub-program, for funding sources, for sub-grantees, for sites, and for individual vacancies. So if a voucher or a vacancy becomes available, all of those different eligibility rules of that network of related institutions and organizations comes filtered together and is used to select a criteria for who is eligible for that. And then within that eligibility, who is most vulnerable and would most be best served by it. As Laila said, then what the end result is hopefully the most vulnerable individual with the most best fit for that given opportunity. And as an aside, that bit of algorithm is actually a point of conversation that we've went around with quite a few times. Because sure, you can say you take all the eligibility rules and you figure out the best match. But some vacancies have very little restrictions, right? They're sort of open to a larger population, and others have many, many, many restrictions. Well, how does that play in when you're trying to come up with a priority? So do you try to target someone who may not be the most vulnerable individual technically, but fits a very restrictive criteria base, and say, wait a minute, this is someone who's probably going to succeed in this particular opportunity? Or do you sort of do it straight down and say, well, no, the most vulnerable comes to the first opportunity that person is eligible for? So that's been sort of an ongoing dialogue, and again, it begins then of using the system to build the data set to sort of see the success of that. And this is just a little insight into sort of our agile process. Different designs that we've come up with to sort of show the steps visually within the process of matching, and haven't implemented actually any of those, but use them as an illustration of sort of saying, wait a minute, one of these would probably be useful. And I think that's back to you.
So successes and challenges, where have we come? So since we started matching chronically homeless individuals through this coordinated access system, 51 people have successfully matched to a housing resource. Most of those housing resources have been tenant-based vouchers, so 17 of those folks are actually housed, and the rest are in housing search. We now have this nightly data coming from our HMIS warehouse into the housing matching engine, and also loading so people can see exactly where someone slept last night, and perhaps where they had lunch yesterday, which is helping quite a bit with coordination in our system. Our coordinated access system is live linked to that HMIS data, so it's also in real time. We now have the basis for a data-driven system, and we're starting to use data to hold providers accountable, to drive towards housing first, to drive towards outcomes, to reach our goals. And we know there's more we can do in that realm now that we have the data in this format. We have reporting to HUD, all coded into our warehouse. Our systems performance measures are coded. We're starting to use that back out to our providers again, so that they see where they're stacking up in those system performance measures. We're starting to create performance dashboards around our goals. So we're working on a dashboard for homeless veterans. How are we doing? What are we learning from the data? How can we improve based on what we see? And we have, as Jen talked about, this network sharing agreement amongst our partners, and we're working on other sharing agreements beyond that as well, including the county houses of corrections and Medicaid data and other data sets that will help us improve our performance and improve our outcomes. Where have we run into some challenges? Certainly, there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of stakeholders. There are a lot of tech stakeholders. There's our multiple HMIS vendors. And so coordinating those has been a challenge. We're in a much better place, but that has taken some time. Certainly, a lot of this data sharing, the complex part gets bogged down in HIPAA rules, and who's a HIPAA covered entity, who's not a HIPAA covered entity, what the implications are to be sharing amongst those different types of groups. And we have needed to bring in outside expertise, legal expertise that understands HIPAA, and we're still working our way through some of those constraints. And then last, speed to housing. We're still refining our matching engine so that it is fast and it's efficient, and we can move people through quicker than we ever have before, and then sell that to other housing entities. So beyond the COC providers, COC housing providers, look, we can match on average in this number of days, so come put your units into our system and we'll be able to get you tenants fairly quickly. And we're just now starting to look at performance reports out of our housing matching engine, so we can start to see where we can improve our time to housing. And so where are we headed? So certainly, we want to expand beyond matching chronically homeless individuals to permanent supportive housing to other populations. We want to be able to match veterans to housing, but also we want to bring in our rapid rehousing resources into the system, and then we want to bring in housing resources that we don't fund as a continuum of care, but that are dedicated to homeless households. So we have affordable housing in our community that are reserved for homeless households. Our housing authority has a homeless preference, so there is a lot of opportunity to expand this and bring in a lot more housing to be able to match to. As Ian talked about, we're starting with this pilot with Healthcare for the Homeless to integrate healthcare data with homeless data, but we see that could be something that we expand quite a bit more. There certainly is a lot of value in understanding how housing improves folks' health outcomes and how to target housing to very vulnerable people based on their medical status. Right now we're a HMIS for Boston, but we know that people are crossing the river and crossing city lines, and so we do have a vision of sharing or integrating our data with other continuums of care in our state. We certainly want to bring in more qualitative information as needed, so we may want to bring in case manager notes into our warehouse window. And there's opportunity here now that we have this data system to bring in new users. So we can, kind of conceptually open source our homeless response. Maybe there are community groups that have not typically been able to help people get into housing that could be part of it. So if someone shows up at a library and they have a housing match but they need an ID, could that librarian help this person get their photo ID and help move them to housing? So there's a lot of possibilities now that we have these different tools and different windows for our information. And I'm going to pass it back to Ian to talk about the last slide.
So we have all this data now, and it's growing and growing and growing. We keep adding more. We add different types. We add more records. And we sort of live in the world now of machine learning and artificial intelligence and predictive analytics. And as software developers, our heads immediately go to, well, what can we do with all of this data? Or what are the sort of secrets within that we can start to leverage? All of the data in there, and Boston has a tremendous data set that goes back years and years and years, theoretically, perhaps could yield interesting questions, interesting answers to things like, where is chronicity coming from? So all of the clients that now are being targeted for coordinated access are on the chronic list. And the calculation of that is very straightforward. But is there something in those clients' histories that would have been a predictor that could be, say, if this pattern of services was identified early on, that person could be there could be an intervention before the state of chronicity was reached, that there was a consistent pattern that could be identified within the data that would actually allow for early identification. And as then the system is being used for different purposes like coordinated access to housing, can we learn from the successes and failures? Because these folks have been in housing before, those opportunities have come up and they failed, and why was that? And is there something in the larger data set of their actions, their interactions with agencies, the opportunity itself, the attributes around that we can sort of mine out to start to predict opportunity match success, and to sort of say, well, wait a minute, what is the best match, what is the best opportunity for this individual for success? And then obviously being able to look at program performance of agencies and services that are actually being provided, because now with this whole integrated history, you can start to say, well, wait a minute, is this agency's actions, is this shelter program leading to success? Is it related to other activities? And that gets, again, very exciting when you start to go into the healthcare side of things, because you have so many different data points from so many different types of organizations. You can sort of look for patterns. So that's all the hope. We're not there yet. We are finally getting the larger data set. That's certainly where we hope to go very soon. And just to sort of to follow up, both Laila and Jen mentioned the open source. Boston was pretty progressive in their licensing choice, because it's open source under the GPL license, which means it's available for everyone for free. Any community, any organization can adopt it and use it as is. And any modification that is made, any improvement or enhancement, either for commercial or nonprofit use, has to also go into the open source. So the hope really is that another community or organization will adopt it and start to contribute back to it. And again, there's no royalties, there's no license fees, so technically it is freely available to everyone. And actually, since this presentation, there has been another community in Massachusetts that's adopted it, and the hope is that more will. A little mechanical bit, it's a Ruby on Rails application built on top of originally Microsoft SQL Server, and that was a technical requirement of the city of Boston, but it's since been migrated to Postgres. For Boston, Green River actually handles it as a hosted solution. We have a HIPAA-compliant installation on Amazon and sort of provide it as a service. But any community can take it and either internally to their IT department or have another development shop take it and deploy it and use it.
So thank you. We are really excited for the possibility of partnering with other folks. We built this using open source code so that we could collaborate with other communities. And what we ask is any community that does decide to take up the code, that anything you build or modify, you contribute back to the open source code. And in that way, we're collectively learning from each other and building, improving together on our collective mission to end homelessness in our communities. So please do reach out to us. Our contact information is here. And we are happy to explore the potential of partnering together on either the data warehouse or the coordinated access housing matching engine. Thank you.